Machiavelli made a claim that still unsettles people 5 centuries later, that goodness, practiced without discretion, is not a virtue that protects you. It's often the exact thing that gets you destroyed. He watched ruler after ruler fall, not because they lacked morals, but because they trusted the world to reward those morals the way it should have, and rarely, if ever, did. Today, we uncover the hidden cost of unconditional goodness, why Machiavelli believed it was one of the most dangerous qualities a person could carry, unexamined into a world that doesn't play by the same rules. Goodness without boundaries becomes an invitation. Machiavelli observed that rulers who extended endless mercy, endless patience, endless forgiveness without any accompanying limits didn't inspire loyalty in everyone around them. They inspired calculation in the specific people looking for exactly that kind of weakness to exploit. Unconditional goodness, offered without discernment about who actually deserves it, functions less as a virtue and more as an open invitation to anyone willing to take advantage of it repeatedly, knowing consequences will never actually follow. The good person who never says no, who forgives every transgression instantly and completely, doesn't teach people to behave better around them. They quietly teach people that mistreatment carries no real cost. This isn't an argument against genuine kindness, generosity, or forgiveness as values worth holding. It's a warning that goodness without any boundary becomes indistinguishable to a certain kind of person from permission, and the people most likely to notice and exploit that permission are rarely the ones who deserved the goodness in the first place. Machiavelli's insight here was uncomfortable precisely because it forced good people to confront a difficult truth. Sometimes protecting your own goodness requires the willingness to withhold it selectively. The world punishes. Predictable softness. A person whose kindness is entirely predictable, who can always be counted on to yield, apologize first, or absorb blame to keep the peace, becomes remarkably easy to manipulate by anyone who studies their patterns even briefly. Machiavelli understood that predictability, in any form, hands enormous strategic advantage to those observing it, and predictable softness is no exception. It simply means the manipulation required is gentler, quieter, and easier to disguise as normal interaction. The world doesn't punish kindness itself. It frequently punishes the specific combination of kindness and total predictability, because that combination removes uncertainty for anyone considering whether they can take advantage of you without meaningful resistance. This is why some of the kindest people end up carrying the heaviest emotional and practical burdens in their relationships and workplaces, not because kindness inherently invites this outcome, but because their kindness arrived without the accompanying unpredictability that would make exploiting it feel risky rather than safe. Virtue signaled. Too loudly becomes a target. Machiavelli noted that rulers who publicly, constantly emphasized their own virtue and moral superiority often became specific targets for those eager to expose hypocrisy, real or manufactured, simply because the loud claim created an irresistible opportunity. The person who quietly does good without announcing it repeatedly gives critics far less material to work with than the person whose goodness has become a central, publicly performed part of their identity. This isn't a suggestion to hide genuine values entirely, but a recognition that virtue displayed as a performance, seeking visible credit or admiration, creates vulnerability that private virtue simply doesn't. Every public claim to moral superiority invites scrutiny, and scrutiny applied by people with their own motives tends to find something, a single inconsistency, a single moment of ordinary human failure that can be inflated into evidence of hypocrisy far beyond its actual significance. Machiavelli's princes who survived longest weren't necessarily the most virtuous. They were often the ones who practiced whatever virtue they held without turning it into a public spectacle that others could later use against them, trusting good intentions over demonstrated behavior. One of Machiavelli's sharpest observations was that good people frequently extend trust based on stated intentions rather than demonstrated behavior, assuming that because someone claims good values, they'll act accordingly when it actually matters. This optimistic extension of trust, however well-intentioned, ignores the uncomfortable reality that intentions are cheap to declare and expensive to verify, while behavior under pressure reveals character far more reliably than any conversation about values ever could. The good person's tendency to give others the benefit of the doubt repeatedly, even after behavior has already contradicted stated intentions multiple times, becomes a specific vulnerability that less scrupulous people learn to recognize and rely upon. Machiavelli would argue that genuine goodness requires pairing generous initial trust with careful, ongoing observation of actual behavior rather than extending unlimited benefit of the doubt indefinitely simply because someone continues claiming good intentions after repeatedly failing to demonstrate them. The cost of avoiding necessary conflict. Machiavelli understood that many people mistake conflict avoidance for goodness, believing that keeping the peace at almost any cost represents a moral virtue rather than what it frequently actually is, a strategy that protects short-term comfort while allowing long-term harm to compound unaddressed. The ruler who avoided every difficult confrontation to maintain surface harmony often discovered that the underlying problems didn't disappear. They simply grew larger, more entrenched, and considerably harder to address by the time avoidance finally became impossible. This pattern repeats constantly in personal relationships, where the desire to be seen as good, easy, and undemanding leads people to swallow legitimate grievances repeatedly rather than risk the discomfort of necessary confrontation. Machiavelli's uncomfortable insight here was that true goodness sometimes requires the willingness to create temporary conflict in service of a healthier, more honest long-term outcome, rather than prioritizing the appearance of goodness through constant, silent accommodation. None of this means Machiavelli advocated for abandoning goodness, kindness, or genuine virtue in favor of calculated cruelty. That reading badly misunderstands what he actually argued across his writing. What he insisted on again and again was that goodness practiced naively, without discernment, without boundaries, and without accompanying strength, doesn't survive contact with a world that contains people entirely willing to exploit it. The hidden price of being good, in Machiavelli's view, isn't goodness itself. It's the specific combination of goodness with predictability, with unlimited trust, and with an unwillingness to ever risk temporary discomfort in service of a long-term integrity. Pay attention to that combination, correct it where necessary, and goodness stops being a liability quietly waiting to be exploited and becomes instead exactly what it was always meant to be, a genuine strength.